Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're back to part two of our discussion of the defense in this big win over the Steelers. Joining me for that is Jordan Coe. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, Ken. Thanks for having me on.
Always my pleasure, my friend. Great first show. If you want to really get pissed off at the usage of Malik Harrison, the usage of Brandon Stevens, some choice words there from Jordan on the topic. Some missed tackles going each way. We talked about the ball bouncing a little funny for both teams, more so in the Ravens manner in this game, more so in the Steelers manner, certainly in the first game. But we kind of dressed that topic up a little bit, talked through it, talked a little bit about the Ravens' playoff hopes and who the Ravens might like to make the playoffs and why there's a lot of value to having a strong number 7 seed when you're about to be the number 3 or 4 seed, as the Ravens are likely to be. So Ravens kept their hopes alive for their for the chance of winning the division, and they secured their spot in the playoffs this last week. So now we can start to think about getting greedy and what it would take to win the division. The Ravens have a number of pass there. We did go over some of that in that first episode. But right now we're going to start, I think, the second episode talking a little bit about the pass rush. Any overarching thoughts about the pass rush, Jordan?
I would say that it felt a little lackluster at times. And like the Ravens seem to just go through bouts of this where they have plays where they look exceptionally good. They get pressure, they shed, it's schemed up, and they're there. And then there are plays where it's just not there. And it seems to have completely vanished. And whether it's guys off the edge or the interior, they just like can't get off those blocks. And those plays are, I mean, they've been kind of burned on the plays that those instances happen, as would happen in any instance in the league. And so you really either got to count on having really good pass defenders in those situations, or you've got to get that figured out in terms of what's going on for the pass rush.
Yeah, I mean, a high percentage of Ravens fans really want a high-end pass rusher as part of the next generation of Ravens, whether that means in the draft, which is what it probably means. But there's a whole bunch of people who would love the Ravens to have acquired Max Crosby, for example, which would have come at an enormous cost, including the inability to re-sign some players, which would be unfortunate. To me, the most important element of the Ravens pass rush is the interior guys and how they force the hand of opponents to basically leave one-on-ones on the outside. The Ravens have been extremely successful from a franchise building standpoint at getting those cheap veteran pass rushers. And now the list is long now, but you can start with Justin Houston and add Clowney and Van Noy to that group. And even like players like Jason Pierre-Paul, who are a level down from there. Yannick Ngakoue did not quite meet the line, but they tried him. But they traded originally for Yannick Ngakoue, and that was definitely the wrong move in terms of what they gave up for him then. So, I think the Ravens have done a good job searching through the bargain bin. It does happen to be a position that has a fair amount of longevity, and there's some bias against older pass rushers.
Yeah, I mean, they've been able to get enough productivity for what they need, but we missed the days, obviously, of Terrell Suggs and Elvis Dumervil together. We missed the days of Terrell Suggs exclusively, quite frankly, and his ability in terms of what he brought to the defensive line in its kind of entirety. Would love to see the Ravens be able to get or add a high level pass rusher, but Suggs it's by virtue of your draft position, right? Like
Yep.
even Kyle Hamilton was taken 4 picks later than where Suggs was taken. And Suggs was a guy that also fell in the draft in kind of a similar way for similar reasons, quite frankly, to why Kyle Hamilton did. Not a good enough 40 time. And so it's not going to happen this year in terms of like where the Ravens are going to be. I mean, we already know that from where they are. If the season were to end today, the Ravens would be in the playoffs as a wild card team, and if they were to win another game, you're just not going to be in great position in terms of where you are for the draft. So I want to see a better pass rusher, from an exclusivity standpoint. But that's why they took the shot on David Ojabo. You got to take shots on guys like Owe who have, who are either showing you really good skills as a pass rusher, but not the athleticism, really great athleticism, whichever direction you want to go. You've got to take those lottery tickets. They've done that. They just haven't hit. And that's how the NFL works. That's how sports work. I don't blame DaCosta or the team for that, but I would love to see a more consistent solo pass rusher could be really significant for this defense.
Right. They have not at pick number 30 or pick number 28 or wherever the Ravens have been picking the last few years. There isn't a guy who's perfect in all respects. You just look at the left tackle class this last year and how many there were. The Ravens' significant need at the position, and what was left by the time they got there was not very much. And everybody realized that left tackles are going to be at a premium as soon as Joe Alt was taken, I think, at number 5 by the Chargers, which really set off the whole cavalcade of the whole run on them. So anyway, a bad situation. But let's get back to the Ravens pass rush here in this game. Not a particularly great opportunity set. They allowed 12 ATS opportunities to Wilson. A lot of them were late, and that did play a role in this. And they had 13 pressures. That's not the kind of ratio you want. You'd want 1.5 to 1 in terms of pressures to ATS if you're the defensive team. For the season, I'll give you another example. The Ravens have 212 pressures and 199 ATS opportunities allowed. So 13 to 12 clearly is no better than the Ravens season average as a whole. So that ought to give you a little bit to go on.
Yeah, we need better ratios than that overall. But the Ravens were good when the pressure was there. They were good. And I do think it's worth saying that, some of those packages late were ones where they weren't going to get or even trying to get a significant rush. And they took the windows away from Wilson in those instances. The throws weren't there late in the second half or in the second half period, quite frankly. They really locked it down.
Right. Take a moment here to go over the season record of ATS, BOQ, and pressure. Just give you an idea. 199, I mentioned, is the number of ATS opportunities they've allowed this year. They allowed 8.6 yards per play on those. I use 8.5 as an arbitrary standard the Ravens ought to beat. So I guess I'm saying that the Ravens have been a little worse than average for the year with ATS. It's been about 32.9% of all pass plays that resulted in a pass or sack is the way to say that. And not spikes. Spikes are excluded from this, of course. Ball out quick 193 times, so very close in terms of total numbers. 1,303 yards, 6.8 yards per play. If you can force the ball out quickly, it's generally a shorter yardage play, obviously. It's not exclusively that. Lamar's bomb to Zay Flowers was a ball out quick in this game. And that's true a lot of the balls where there's a fixed time getting it out. But 6.8 yards per play on ball out quick, that number is worse than normal. It was about 5.9 or something last year for the 23 Ravens. And I think a lot of that has to do with some coverage problems at inside linebacker, but it's 32% of all throws. So pretty close to a third there. And then 212 pressures on the year, 3.8 yards per play on those. I use 3.5 as my arbitrary standard. So again, I'm saying the Ravens really have not been quite up to the standard so far for the entire year, although they have been in recent weeks. Most of your sacks come there. 38 of the 47 sacks are with pressure, 9 of the 47 with ATS, and 0 with BOQ, because definitionally you can't have a sack when the ball's out quickly. But anyway, just give you an idea of what to expect in these situations. Those are the numbers that the Ravens have allowed for the year. In this game, 12 ATS, 98 yards, 8.2 yards per play, about 4 yards short of the standard for the total. So 8.5 per play versus 8.2 per play over 12 plays, 4 yards short of the standard that they would have had. Ball out quick, 10 plays, 84 yards. That was about 24 yards better than the standard. So far they're about 20 yards over. But here's where it got good for the Ravens. When they did get pressure, they were very effective. 13 plays, 16 net yards, 1.2 per play, 30 yards below expectation. You add those 3 deltas relative to expectation, you get 10 yards better in total. So should have been about 208 in terms of expectation for Wilson, and he had 198 net yards, which was 10 better. Now that's a very, very small difference from the overall total. But I'd say what's nice about this is the Ravens have been better than they're expected for about the last 5 weeks. And that has really been good because they had some horrible games early in the year, including a plus 140 from Joe Burrow early in the year in one of the Jamar Chase games. So I'm not happy with the opportunity set, but the Ravens actually did a little bit better in the secondary in terms of making that opportunity set pay for them.
That's what I would say probably is the most important thing that we're starting to see from this Ravens team is that the defenses, and this is historically not the way the Ravens have played, playing much better back to front. And so what is happening on the back end of the defense is dictating on what's happening in front of whatever that is. And then they're able to work from that perspective. The Ravens have always been a front seven. Front of the defense is defining what's kind of happening from a defense perspective, or not always, but historically, that's been the kind of team and their kind of approach that they've had. Team P's was the start of, I think, of an evolution of being a little bit more back to front, quarters, implementations, keeping everything in front of you, not letting yourself get beat, forcing teams to kind of like work their way the whole way down the field. A lot of that has to do with good communication, passing off, when to match up, when to stay in zones, when to do some of those certain kind of things. Ravens certainly feel like they have a much better feel for what that needs to look like on the back end. I would say that's a big staple of what Mike Macdonald did. That what he was doing with how he covered guys dictated more than what he was doing with the rush. And it was confusing enough with what was happening with the guys in the secondary of who was going where or what they were supposed to be doing, that it made the pass rush even a little bit better than it might have been from a straight personnel perspective.
So that's a really good point, by the way. The Macdonald defense is, by the way, sacrificed in terms of run defense in order to play the kind of back to front, more adept at pass defense kind of way the team operated last year. And they also got paid off, not just in terms of yardage, they got paid off in turnovers in a big way. Turnovers that occurred as a result of sacks, turnovers that occurred as a result of interceptions, both of them. This year's Ravens team has not been paid off in turnovers. And, you know, they haven't had a big plus turnover number, despite the fact they almost never give the ball away. And that's kind of just a sad fact. If you take Marlon Humphrey out of this defense, boy, they really haven't done anything in terms of turnovers. All right. In terms of numbers, let's talk about that for a little bit. Or use 6 rushes of 5+. That's only 17% of the time. Very unusual. But the Ravens didn't really need it. The 6 plays they had gave up 51 yards, 8.5 yards per play. So it wasn't like they were successful using numbers against the Steelers. And I would expect a number similar to that, because Wilson as a quarterback is going to be able to find a hot read pretty quickly, usually when he sees the blitz coming. Is fairly aware in that regard. What they were successful at in this game, I thought this was great. They used very few blitzes, only 2 off-ball blitzes the entire game. That's 0.06 per play. And those 19 net yards also kind of speaks to the notion that even if you rush somebody off the slot and don't give it away early, that's still a space on the field that Wilson knows he can make a throw.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that what we saw in this game is what we are going to see for the rest of the year. I think obviously the Cleveland game might be different, because I think we're going to see DTR in that game, but you're going to see a similar approach to Stroud. You'll see a similar approach. I guess, again, it will depend on, like, I think it might not be the same if it's like a Bo Nix led defense, but I think you're going to see something similar, quite frankly, for the rest of the year from the Ravens. There's no need to load the box. If teams want to choose to run against them, and this was, again, you talked about this a little bit from Mike Macdonald's perspective. Gabe and I were talking about this while we were watching the game. It seemed like the Ravens would be a team in the first half last year that would be willing to use light boxes and willing to let teams run a little bit more against them, reveal what they were doing with their run scheme, adjust in the second half in terms of what they wanted to do with those run fits. So in those moments, they could take them away if they needed to, but then use all of the bells and whistles on the back end and the stunts and things when they needed to in those big moments to create pressure in those ways.
That's a really good point, by the way. And if you look back at the Rams game last year, it fits exactly into that mold. I think Kyren Williams ran 9 times, maybe 9 times in a row on this first drive, got them all down inside the 20-yard line. Then they did something to screw it up. I forget whether it was they turned it over on downs or they threw an interception or whatever they did. They decided they had to throw for the touchdown, and they either didn't get it and had to kick a field goal, or they actually turned the ball over. I can't recall the exact thing, but I do think of that as being like scripted plays that you have on defense that you're gonna show them this. You're gonna show it's not just on offense. Some of it is reactionary, but they're working with a limited pool, and part of the reason for that could well be that they wanted to change it at a time later, in particular after halftime.
Well, it felt like the Ravens were a little too scripted, and looking at like the total, speaking of like kind of like scripts on offense, like thinking a little bit about the drives in this game, all the way until the drive with the fumble from Wilson, it felt like the Ravens were staying in too high no matter what. and the Steelers were running down there. It felt like they were kind of running, maybe not at will, but certainly with impunity against to pick up first downs or to advance from like a down and distance perspective pretty significantly up until that point. Big shift in the second half once that happened. Kyle Hamilton played a lot more in the box in the second half. I don't know. It's hard to tell in terms of kind of like where they were adjusting some of those fits on the defensive line, but the run defense changed significantly in the second half in terms of kind of approach and what they were doing within the box. And it ended up making a really big difference, right? So scripted in the sense that, you know, teams are going to show you what they want, what they've practiced and what they're trying to implement in terms of the run game. If you overcommit too early, you know, you might be playing into their hands. They might stay with that script longer. So, you know, who knows whether or not it's a little bit of gamemanship or not. Gabe thought that Mike Macdonald liked to kind of use a bit of that gamemanship. I think some of it also is just like when you make the smarter adjustments in terms of what that needs to be, then you see that improvement. We saw Hamilton make a couple tackles on running backs in the second half that we didn't see him make at all in the first half. So you make those adjustments and you can clean those up, and then you do those on first or second down and you get them into long down and distances, and all of a sudden it's a lot easier to call a defense. You know, as critical as you might want to be of, like, you know, Zach Orr earlier in the year or even within a game, you keep teams in long down and distances and second and third downs, and it's just a lot easier to call defense.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of universally true. It's like rushing four and getting pressure. Okay,
Right.
so I mentioned off-ball blitzes. They didn't really do too much of that. What they did do a lot of was stunts. They used 8 stunts in the game. That included 2 doubles and only 3.0 yards per play. And we've seen some very selectively effective deception recently from Orr. Actually, the games where he's had minimal use of deception, he's been very effective in terms of the how that deception has worked out, and it's just been like drum beats recently. The one game exception to that was the Giants the week before, where the Ravens used an unbelievable amount of deception with the Giants having 2 young quarterbacks and actually hurt them. They actually were not as good with using the deception as they were just sticking with a 4-man rush, which is a little odd, but it was true.
I think also some of that is penalties. Right. So you take like there were massive drive extenders for like 2 or 3 different drives in that Giants game that made a really big difference.
And it's hard to say. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not those would have included deceptive elements, but they would have had a pass.
It's hard to say,
and I wouldn't have included it in my numerator.
Sure, it would be it would almost be impossible to track that, or not worthwhile.
Simulated pressures, they used 7, not particularly successful with those, 8.3 yards per play, and 2+ elements. They had 4 plays, 8 yards, 2.0 yards per play on that. So these highly complex blitzes are usually worth it. Oftentimes scripted as well. I think that they really know what they want to call in those situations, and those often involve a corner coming on the blitz. Not always, but they certainly can. Hamilton was on one such play. I remember. He's not a corner, but he was blitzing on one of them. Madubuike had contributions of 4 pressure events within 3 seconds, and I see why I'm going down this route. Van Noy had 3, a quarterback hit and 1.5 sacks, and Jones had 3 pressures. So again, the Ravens, a lot of what the Ravens did, and of course we know Pierce had the sack -10, was that pressure coming from the inside. In this game, it was actually a case of a lot of the events were coming from the inside. But they got a lot of good pressure from Madubuike in this game, which is really nice to see after some quiet play over the last few weeks.
Yeah, we need to continue to see the growth of Madubuike and Travis Jones as contributors from an outcome perspective as we get up the chain of quality quarterbacks from here out from the end of the year. So if we're going to talk about, whether it's Stroud, Burrow, Allen, and Mahomes, you're going to need individual performances from players, even amongst all this scheme and all these things that we're doing, and to step up. I mean, we saw Michael Pierce do it in this game with that big time sack. You love to see a big guy get a sack like that. But they're going to need a couple of those plays a game to be impactful moments to be able to be competitive against these, against what are some really good teams in the AFC.
Right. And definitely, there are no bad quarterbacks in the playoffs unless you think Bo Nix is the weak sister you want to beat on here. That's
He is the basic star I want to beat on, for
Yeah,
the record.
it's probably a
He's
really bad metaphor here, by the way, to be using, but we know we mean this only in a sporting way here. 13 different Ravens had a pressure in this game. Nice to see the wealth spread out a little. That's not an exceptionally high total. There were more, I believe, versus the Giants, where they had played everybody down the whole roster to get somebody some opportunities. But not an unbelievably great pass rush, but again, something where the secondary outperformed the opportunity sets that were given, and the opportunity set overall was not too much different from what had been for the whole season.
And I think your point earlier about Russell Wilson being a guy that could ID over blitzing and really burn you for it, and getting this set of results. I don't think that Wilson, obviously the interception for the touchdown return was probably his worst throw. But I think generally speaking, if you look at the set of what he did, he threw the ball away when he needed to. He didn't make a lot of like really terrible decisions. This is a good framework for the Ravens to look at what the type of quarterback play ish is going to look like and how they need to approach it and how they need to adjust for it. So in that sense, it's also a positive of kind of getting a feel for what worked and didn't work in this style of defense in a game like this, and being able to make sure that they're continuing to progress on that here through the playoffs.
I like that. I like that. And it's not like you're not saying that Russell Wilson is the same quality as even the 5th best quarterback that the Ravens will face in the playoffs, because it's Mahomes, it's Stroud, it's Allen, it's Burrow potentially, it's Herbert. Yeah, I forgot about Herbert exactly. And there's somebody else who I haven't named here, but I can't remember who it is. And certainly not Lamar Jackson.
Stroud. So I think Stroud was the one you didn't name.
Yeah. But it's a good group of quarterbacks that they're going to face, and yeah, you can get some hints from a player like Wilson who's aware and does some things well. I did think that Wilson was kind of more bothered by the pressure in terms of needing to move away from it than I thought he had to be. There's a lot of, I thought, fairly early eyes back on the pass rush as opposed to down the field from Russell Wilson in this game that I thought led to some movement. Not that he was ineffective doing it. Obviously, the one scramble left and the third down conversion was a big one. But he moved around a lot. He moved to the sideline a lot, forced himself kind of with decent pursuit from other players into throwing the ball away.
Yeah, he's a little jumpy, but you know what? So is Josh Allen, quite frankly. Obviously, he gets out of the pocket without being sacked significantly more effectively than Wilson does, and he throws the ball particularly deep when he gets out of the pocket better than Wilson does. But I think it speaks volumes that the same approach in a Buffalo game, I think, that to what you saw in this Pittsburgh game yielded similar results for those quarterbacks. And that is kind of what I'm speaking to, which is that, okay, now go back and look at this, right? If the Steelers were in 3-1 in some of these circumstances, what were they doing with that? Where does it look like what we were doing here leaves gaps? Just gives you some good tape to be able to build on in a structure that ideally you're, obviously every single game is going to be tailored to every single team that you're playing against uniquely. But I think that there's a lot more similarities from here through the end of the year, whoever those teams are, minus the Browns, that will be similar to what came out of this game. And I think that's a really positive building block for what this team could potentially be for the area that they needed to do more work on. Quite frankly, the defense is the area that needed work. And so this lets them continue to build on that.
Yeah. And they built well. And, one of the advantages they have is they've played every single one of the potential playoff field in the AFC, unless you think Miami and Indianapolis are a chance to make it, who they haven't played. Everybody else they've played. They've had 2 games against Joe Burrow. They've faced Allen, they've faced Mahomes, they've faced Denver and San Diego, and their quarterbacks were healthy. All those games, the quarterbacks are healthy, and they're going to face the guys that they're going to face in the playoffs. So it's not like they don't have this experience, and I think that should serve them pretty well. All right. How about we do some individual player discussion and just tell me who'd you like to talk about first?
I'll talk about Travis Jones. I know we did the preseason chat about Travis Jones. Another great game from him. I think he's a guy that hopefully they can. I think the Texans are a team that the Ravens can really get out in front of and run up the score on potentially, and also really keep their defense in check. CJ Stroud has really regressed. Travis Jones, and I say all that to say that Travis Jones, keeping this man healthy is paramount to the remainder of the season, whatever it is. Because when he is on the field, he's making a big impact in the run, in the pass, all of the above. Let him keep that ankle healthy, even if that means that he can't play in the Cleveland game, or you hold him out some of or as much as you possibly can in week 18 so he's ready when we hit the playoffs. Just his ability to take on doubles, to take on pressure, to create pressures, to stop the run, just incredible. Like, what an incredible second round, third round pick? Third round.
Travis Jones, a third, number 76. Yep.
What an incredible pick for the Ravens. Going to be hopefully a really good Raven for a really long time. Continues to show up and show out. And him and Madubuike, I think, can be doing a lot of damage in the interior of this line for a long time.
Well, if you look at the score sheet, Madubuike and Jones are playing together almost every time they're on the field. In fact, when we enter the material, we go, okay, just take Madubuike's line, copy it down, and we'll make a few adjustments, or so, a couple plays here and there. That's literally all we do. It's very limited. But Madubuike playing a lot of snaps right now. He's fortunate that he's getting almost all single teams based on who the Ravens having playing next to him. And you mentioned earlier the year of Suggs and Dumervil in 2014 when they had 60 sacks, and a team record for actually they might have had 64 that year, right? No, they had 56. It was the second highest total in team history. That's what it was. So, but those guys had fantastic years, and I'm not taking that away from them. The guy who made that pass rush run was Pernell McPhee from the inside. The guy could certifiably step right between two players and have it not matter in terms of being obstructed the quarterback. Beat tons of doubles, commanded doubles. I mean, he's just a guy that totally drove that pass rush, made Suggs a lot more effective than he had been around that time. And he had been Defensive Player of the Year just 3 years earlier. And then with Dumervil came in and didn't have quite, I guess, a career year. Didn't he have 17 sacks at Denver 1 year or something? But he had a big total anyway with the Ravens.
I'm super curious whether or not the Ravens, and my recollection of this is the Ravens, even when they get close to the end of any season, constantly still are always rotating guys no matter what. And like they can't find their way away from whatever that philosophy is. But if it's me and we're losing in the second half of an important game down the stretch in the playoffs, I am finding a freaking way to get Michael Pierce, Travis Jones, and Madubuike on the field together as much as possible. I don't care who's on the outsides of like those combinations. That is a potent interior set of guys, both against the run and the pass.
I mean, they're almost there right now. So first of all, the only way you get all
Jones and Pierce almost never play together though.
Well, no, but here's my point. And they did have one snap together recently, which was really exciting to me. Because I've always
wasn't it on the goal line though. It was like the fat guys were in.
Yes. It was. It was 2 out of 3. I think it was 2 out of 3 of them. So it was a base defense package, but it was still nice to see. But the point I want to make about this, and I'm going to forget it here. I'm sure is that when you're picking 3 defensive linemen to play every play, that doesn't really happen. Since nickel is the standard defense, you play that the preponderance of the time. You only have to have 2, but they're basically already doing that. If you're saying you want 2 of those 3 on the field every play, because Madubuike is basically playing every play or pretty damn close to it. He's up 78, 84% on a alternating game basis. I can't believe last year how much I'm harping on the fact that Madubuike playing 49% or 52% of snaps might really be better for him in terms of getting more production out of him. I admit that I was wrong about that. I've got to occasionally do that. That's something that was obviously turns out to be unfounded. He's got a lot more durability than I thought. But anyway, going back to what they're doing, they're now at the point where Pierce or Jones is on the field every single play. I mean, when Madubuike is in, which is almost every play, they have that exact pairing.
Also, 3-3-5 is a thing, right? Like you can play with 3 linebackers and
one inside linebacker.
Right, one inside linebacker. Yeah, you can do this thing in a 3-3-5 where you've got your three of your best pass rushers on the field together, right? And Pierce, from a collapsing pocket perspective, is phenomenal. I think Jones' performance next to him will go up significantly if they played more together. But then we could be in a world where there's no Chris Board, no Malik
Great
Harrison,
point.
and no Brandon Stevens on the field, and you still have probably your best 11 guys on the field together. And the Ravens, I just don't understand why they haven't figured out a way to do that in some circumstances.
Well, they did do that a lot under Martindale. I called it jumbo nickel, but it's a single linebacker behind a basically what is a base front, and still not sacrificing your nickel. So you're sacrificing your weak side linebacker in exchange for that. The thing you need with that is safeties who are adept and exactly know all the rules for run fitting. So when you have Tony Jefferson back on the back end, he's the ideal guy for you to have in that situation. And they did, in 2018, they went to that well a lot, and they had Tony Jefferson there, and they could alternate between playing a big nickel, a regular nickel, a jumbo nickel, and they could show the other team different looks. And I think a lot of it was just how the hell do we adapt to this different thing that they're going to put out there, and throw a monkey wrench in whatever their scripted plans are, because the defense gets to react second. So I do like the idea of having different things, and I really like the idea that the Ravens might get inventive enough to go back to jumbo nickel as one of the options. I'll ask the question: do you think it's actually been discussed this year with or a weak side linebacker by Trinity? Yeah. He did go to the dime. I mean, he's a committed nickel his basically his whole career, and a very good coverage nickel. He's got a guy he probably thought he could make into a good coverage nickel in Trenton Simpson. That hasn't worked out so far. But the question would be, I mean, does a guy like that automatically think, oh yeah, dime is the answer for our pass rush woes here? Or does he have that thrust upon him by other parties in the building?
Or, I mean, if they are aware or willing enough to bench Simpson, then they have to be aware and willing enough to recognize that Board and Malik Harrison aren't quite the answer either. Right. And so that doesn't have to be a person telling him that, right? Like that, obviously it's not been good enough from what they were getting out of that position. Now they have to just take a look at it. Is it too late in the season for what they're trying to do with their scheme to implement something completely different? That's completely possible and reasonable. But finding a way to get Pierce and Jones on the field together, I think, could be really important against both Buffalo and Kansas City. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in kind of like a big nickel scenario. This could be the kind of case where Matabike is taking one of the outside linebacker spots, right? So then you could still stay in your base nickel style, but Jones and Pierce are in the interior together. Matabike slides to outside linebacker. Owe or Van Noy is on the other side with him.
So I think covered then.
Right. So I think you're going to need two guys on the interior, especially against Buffalo and Kansas City, who like to run the ball, that are more effective and that have really good interior offensive lines too. The Kansas City is best in the middle of their defensive line. Put your best players against their best players then. That's always kind of how I felt.
Michael Pierce is part of this rotation, and when Michael Pierce first got into the league, they had a player who was awfully similar to him with the Ravens, and that was Brandon Williams. They put them both on the field at the same time, almost right away in a 1-3 kind of a matchup where Pierce went to the nose and Brandon Williams, they stretched who he could be to put him out of the three. I actually think that kind of hurt Brandon Williams a little bit, but I think that pairing was very effective for stopping the run. There's no denying that. All right, great stuff. That was a really worthwhile discussion. I appreciate you bringing that up as a possibility. It's one I hadn't really thought about, going back to jumbo nickel as a way to get rid of weak side linebacker weakness. Normally, my thing is, well, get them off on passing downs at least, and they can help you still against the run. But it's a perfectly reasonable thing to go to more jumbo nickel. I think,
and if you like Van Noy, sorry,
I think other teams would.
If you like Van Noy as a guy that can drop as well in pass coverage too, then you can do a jumbo nickel and live with it as well. Yeah,
and that's exactly what I was going to say, is that you really need to have a Sam linebacker who can drop the coverage, and the Ravens had that with with Bowser and Judon in those years, and that really made that defense incredibly special and versatile in terms of what they could do. But the other thing you need obvious run fit safeties, and I think Hamilton fits the bill, but you might need him on the back end. I think that Ardarius Washington actually doesn't fit the bill, and I wouldn't want to rely on him. I'd be afraid of the injury risk from having a tackle, even though I think he's been really good at standing up and taking down, driving back some much bigger men. Ferguson and Freiermuth in this game are guys he looked like he was the bigger man when they came together, even Wilson. But they're not. I wouldn't want to have him doing that down after down after down the way I would trust a Jefferson with it. All right, let me bring up a player now. I'll talk about Kyle Van Noy because I thought he had a really good game in general. Van Noy got actually trapped on the inside, lost that right edge a couple runs early, but allowed a couple 9-yard runs by Warren that were, I believe, maybe on the second drive by the Steelers when they made some progress down the field. But if you look at his overall game, it's characterized by a few things. The first is he has some good diagnosis plays, a great hustle play down the field to pick up the loose change that Ardarius Washington knocked free. And then he had a sack and a half, and he had a quarterback hit. In additional, that quarterback hit came off a drop. So we talked about who do you trust to drop. He didn't rush the passer on that play. He dropped off the edge, and it's the opposite edge where he normally was playing. Dropped into the secondary, saw Wilson break the pocket. The rule is the zone guy in the middle on that side to where the rush goes always rushes the quarterback immediately at that point. He came screaming downhill on Wilson, delivered a huge. I was afraid he was going to get penalized. I was afraid he was going to get flagged, but it was a perfectly clean hit. No helmet to the side. Looked like he was going for the spear initially. Then he completely put his shoulder into Wilson's stomach and knocked him down. Just a fine game from Van Noy all the way around, with the exception of a couple of run defense foibles.
What a year, and what a player, and as much as you would say like Brent Urban turned out to be very much a Raven, Kyle Van Noy is like very much a Raven, like the Jared Johnson, like I don't know, just pick the guys that like fall into like that category, and Kyle Van Noy is one of them, and his physicality and durability and all of that. I mean, the fact that he's done this shit this year with a broken eye socket and didn't miss a game from said broken eye socket. Yeesh. Good Lord.
Yeah. I don't like the generally speaking, I don't like the Ben Roethlisberger / Josh Allen. Oh, but I'm playing with all these injuries and I'm still doing this dramatic crapola.
Patrick Mahomes these days too.
It's going around. Excuse me, but I do think there's some of that, and I'm told that the injury actually takes less long than you would expect. But we did have a guy at work who had a broken eye socket, and he could actually move it around. It is very gross. One more thing about Van Noy that I'll ask as a question here. Van Noy clearly is a great teammate. And I've seen elements of that on field where he was out of position on play. Trenton Simpson ran up to yell at him. He just took it right away, said, "Yep, it's my bad," kind of thing. You could tell from the body language that was the exchange because Simpson shut right up about it as soon as that happened. But I kind of want something more from Van Noy as a leader. He's clearly one of the really smart guys on the team, does stand-up comedy in his spare time. I mean, you got to be pretty quick on your feet for that. He's a guy I would expect to be able to lead effectively should the Ravens want him to do it, and should he feel like he has the authority to do it. And that's a place where, it's hard to find a more level-headed veteran player than Van Noy to take advice from. I just wish he'd give it out more often on an unsolicited basis.
Yeah, we also don't know what's happening behind the scenes. I mean, the Ravens, if we are talking about a team that we now think is in the back end of the top 10 from a defense perspective, which from the first 6 weeks of the year was very clearly bottom 10, a lot of introspection and a lot of work, a lot of growth and a lot of humility has had to happen behind those closed doors. And whether that's from Zach Orr being willing to bring in Dean Pease, whether it's Marcus Williams being willing to take a seat and not chatter about that, I think there's been a lot of grown-ass men mentality around that kind of stuff. And you need, whether it's like vocal or not, you need guys that show that leadership style. I think Van Noy has done that to some degree or another in the entire mix of like what has happened there, even if we might not know
it. He's a leader by example. Absolutely. I had a question about Joe Evans. who was pass rusher out of Iowa, played almost all the snaps in one of the first preseason games for the Ravens because they didn't have enough outside linebackers to get it done. And I asked Van Noy at the podium when he's there, is there anything you can say to a young player like that when he's going through a difficult game like that? It was a tough game for Joe. I mean, it's not a perfect game. A lot of things were not going right. But the question is, to Van Noy, do you go over and say anything to that guy? And even I expected the answer to be something like, look, I'll go over and shake his hand or pat him on the back or do something for just playing all these snaps. But everybody loves him for that. That's not what the issue was. Everybody loved his toughness for that. He said, I'm not going to go unsolicited to somebody and say, oh, hey, have you tried thinking of this? And he literally broke into that kind of a voice with it. It's not my place to do that. If I'm asked, I'll certainly offer something. And that's where I think that, there's players who are obviously leaders on the field, leaders in the locker room, leaders on the practice field, probably in a different way. And, Roquan, Ray Lewis, maybe Ed Reed, although maybe Ed Reed's a little different because Ed Reed's a little different in a lot of ways in terms of being a leader. But I don't get the sense that Kyle Van Noy is that kind of a leader.
I think a lot less of that happens in the NFL than we think it does. Like, these guys have been playing the sport a long time.
Yeah.
They don't want other people that are not in their position and not in their room and not like there probably aren't a whole lot of things that one player is thinking that other players have not already considered to like some extent. Now, whether or not they're actually implementing them or they're capable of it or all of that. But like, I don't know. I think that like generally like there's this kind of like jock perspective about athletes and about football players in particular. I think they're all super bright, especially at the NFL level. Like, they have to have incredible brain processing speed. They watch a ton of film. They have all these abilities to like recognize and see tendencies and all of these things, and they're constantly thinking about their trade and their craft all the time. So I think also some of that is just being a veteran like Van Noy has been, and it's kind of like, I mean, I guess in that instance, like, it is different for somebody that might be like a rookie or really young. But I think that for the most part, unsolicited advice, even from teammates at the NFL level, probably doesn't go very far. And it's more virtue of that than him being shy about willing to tell somebody else what he thinks they should do.
That could be. It certainly is.
But we never know. We don't know. We're not in the locker room with these guys. You could definitely be right here, Ken.
All right. Another player you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just like briefly go back to Michael Pierce. The sack was huge. His ability to continue to get interior pressure has been great. Big difference from the Ravens defense since he's been back. I think that if he would have played in the Philadelphia game, it might have been a little bit different as well. Just a big X factor in terms of, again, like, let's keep him healthy and then make him available to use in these big games down the stretch.
Yeah, they played against the enormous athletic physical defensive line in the Eagles. The Ravens really present some of those same problems now in terms of what they have with the combination of Jones, Madubuike, and Pierce, and the ability to still rotate those guys. Whereas Jalen Carter never comes off the field for the Eagles. Basically, I think he played all but one snaps against the Ravens. So he's a special player. Let me move on. I want to talk about. Let's talk about David Ojabo a little bit, because there hasn't been a lot of nice things to say about David Ojabo, and he didn't have a perfect game in this one either, but he had a pressure on one of the last offensive plays, and he also had a pressure, I think, on the interception. Yeah, he had a late quarterback hit on the interception is what it was. It wasn't a pressure within 3 seconds, but it came in. It was bearing down late. So depending on how you want to define a pressure, you might not call it that way, but it was a late quarterback hit. That was nice. And he also had, on the very last offensive play for Pittsburgh, he had a pressure and there was an incomplete pass. Now, by that time, the Steelers were not concerned about the outcome of the game. They were willing to already punt, really to run the ball on that drive earlier to just get the game over with. But Ojabo, it's a small victories at this point.
For sure. My favorite part about that play in particular was that Marlon Humphrey's claim about the taunting. Have you seen this? his claim that it wasn't taunting was that he was trying to get Ajabo's attention because he thought he deserved
Hand
to
off the
score the
ball to him.
touchdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just happened to be pointing at a different guy, but he was in the general same azimuth, heading back towards the middle of the football field.
I love that. I really like that comment from Humphrey. Look, you're right. I mean, any contribution that you can get from Ajabo is valuable at this point. We don't have to, but it would be really helpful to be able to have some future value from Ajabo. It's just hard to say. Sometimes it feels like it's physical, and some weeks it seems like it's mental. It doesn't seem like it's just unclear where the building blocks are. Whereas for Owe, I think a lot of it is just mental still. The physical is there. Ajabo is just the path doesn't seem to be quite as clear. He does seem to be an intuitive pass rusher. He does seem to know what's going on, but then sometimes he has just plays where he's completely swallowed up and can't shed at all, or where he has other assignments and he doesn't seem to have any understanding of what's going on around him. So, but it's not exclusive. So it's very hard to say with what we have from him. Would love to see the Ravens continue to use him. Like I'd like to see them use Trenton Simpson, which is small wins, build, add, small wins, build, add.
Okay, I'll buy that, and I'd also, honestly, I'm at the point where I'm ready to see Adisa Isaac some because I don't think Ajabo fits into their long-term plans. If he did, that'd be great. But just in a year 1 and a year 3 player where you're not sure about either of them, and they both have a lot of physical tools that they might be the guy, you should be highly incented to figure out what you have from the year 1 player relative to the year 3 player. And that's something I don't think that the Ravens have been great about. And it shows up in their depth chart to start, training camp, is that they've always got every rookie, even if they're a first round draft pick, might be their number 4 on the depth chart at tight end, kind of thing. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I'll take on the flip side of that, Tavius Robinson, who does seem like he's got a long-term role with the Ravens. Certainly early down, like we continue to see good run stuffing from him. We've seen a couple sacks from him. I mean, I didn't see what the snap counts ended up coming out to be in this game, but I would not be surprised if he had as many or more snaps than Owe.
I think he might have even topped Van Noy, but let me go to this for a second. So Robinson had I had 28 snaps. Both Owe and Van Noy had 33. So, but there was a previous game, and it might have been Philadelphia. It might have been one of the other ones where I think he played all but 4 snaps. Like
I think it was before Philly. Yeah, he had a huge. I remember the game. I don't remember the game, but I remember what you're talking about, where he had a huge number of snaps. But he just seems like he's going to be a versatile fit long term for what the Ravens want to do in terms of outside linebacker. He seems to be continuing his progression in that regard. I don't think he's ever going to be an elite player, but he's certainly going to have a role in this team and a solid contributor and a guy at a spot where the Ravens could really use that depth right now. That's really paying off.
Yeah, he's a I won't say the characteristic is odd, but if you can defend the run and be a guy that will work into a base package on early downs, that does have value. And the Ravens have found a way to use 2 such players at outside linebacker, which by the way, I think is overdoing it. I think I would much rather have a guy who can provide something as a pass rusher on that Sam side, or a guy who can give you something in coverage. But I can't take just a run defender on the Sam side. And that's what they really have with Harrison right now. It's not an ideal situation. And they obviously want Harrison for special teams more than anything. And they probably want him for what it can give you in terms of versatility, outside linebacker, inside linebacker, second, although they may have deluded themselves into thinking they want those other things first now. All right. Another player, let's talk about Kyle Hamilton. Great game moving around the football game. And here, one of the top Ravens players in this game. Just so much to love about what he does. Goes around, makes tackles. The play in center field was fantastic. He had another play right around that. That was it a pass for -1 or something on the play before it? Yeah, it actually had that was a pass left for 1 where he forced the fumble. Was the very play before he goes back and he finds the ball in the air like he did. Really nice to see him make a center fielder play, by the way. We've seen him on a little bit of bracketing, but not really too much even there. He's most of his value, even when he's playing free safety, has been probably unseen to the typical Ravens fans because they don't see where the quarterback is not throwing the ball. But that's where Kyle Hamilton is having some impact.
Yeah, I mean, there is not enough to say about Kyle Hamilton and what he contributes to this offense or this defense, and his ability to be versatile in terms of what he's going to do. I think there's going to be a moment where it's going to make a really big difference. And whether it's a big time deep interception on a free safety play that he's made, whether it's him coming up into the box in a big situation that teams might not have expected it, that versatility, that's the kind of thing that can really pay off in the NFL. And obviously he's contributed a ton already, but we're waiting for that, kind of like the Indianapolis game last year, where he's going to have a splash game somewhere down the line here where he is the reason that the Ravens won. Not that he hasn't been that already, but like on both on paper and kind of behind the scenes. And I'm excited for whenever that's going to happen.
Me too. Me too. Another player you'd like to talk about, or we can move on to the mailbag if we think we're good.
Yeah, we can move the mailbag real quick. Just Wiggins has been really great. The deep catch over him was insanity, like outright insanity. That play to Austin over him was great coverage from him. He was looking at the ball. It wasn't a Brandon Stevens moment. That was an elite catch in that moment that we all weren't even sure was a catch because it was so well covered. But otherwise, Wiggins has been really good. He needs as close to a full-time role at this point, I think, as the Ravens are willing to give him. And he even came up on a couple of plays in the run defense and made some nice tackles as well. That's probably the one area him and Ardarius fit in that same box that you said about him, where I worry a little bit that they can't handle the durability of some of those run games. But at the end of the day, we're down to the end of the season, and this is football.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly the way they have to play it. The one question I would have about Wiggins is it time now to have the Ravens cornerbacks start traveling, which I think would mean put Wiggins on the opposing number one with help over the top. And so if you have guys like Chase that you have to give the Randy Moss treatment to, you go ahead and do that kind of a thing. What that would do is probably put Humphrey on the number two a lot, or maybe you keep Humphrey in the slot just because you're playing nickel most of the time and you don't otherwise have Humphrey travel, but you have Stevens travel to the number two and put him on an island, which that actually, now that I think about it, even scares me maybe more. So, but it is something the Ravens are always telegraphing to the opponent directly who their right corner is going to be, which means that their ex receiver, who's typically lined up opposite that, has a big advantage, and they can set the advantage as they like. The Ravens can't do anything about it once they are set up apparently, and they would need to change their philosophy to go to a traveling system.
Yeah, and I don't need it to be a traveling system as long as Brandon Stevens isn't the guy on the other side.
All right. So you just replace Stevens with Wiggins at right corner if you had the right guy to bring in, and maybe Tre'Davious White is the guy.
I will go with Tre'Davious White. Yeah, for sure. And he has shown his ability to defend an ex receiver. So, but hey, we'll see.
All right, now let's go to some questions from the mailbag. We got time for a few of these here. Got one from Angelove85. That's at Nikki622A. She says, happy holidays, Ken. Now that we're in the playoffs, which playoff-bound team does the defense match up best with? Which team concerns you? I believe I saw a stat that our D is top 10 since we switched safeties. So do we match up with anyone?
I think we match up best with Denver and Buffalo, quite frankly. Teams with not terribly great wide receiver threats, decent running games, and a commitment to that, a slightly mobile quarterback, but a willingness to like what that approach looks like. And just, they're different in terms of how they can be a little bit turnover prone deep. Like Allen is pushing the ball a bit more and with obviously a lot more accuracy than Bo Nix. Bo Nix just can't throw the ball more than 15 yards. So there's a huge advantage to the team like the Ravens, which have had safety and depth issues, to be able to just know that all that's going to stay right in front of them. I think Denver provides the best matchup to them from a defense to offensive perspective.
I think they'll be fine against the Texans because of Stroud. I think has some error proneness. We've seen uncover more this year than last, where he was kept the ball out of trouble for a lot of the year. But I think he's somewhat at risk of that. And they definitely don't have the great depth of wide receiver, particularly after the Tank Dell injury. That looked at just a really bad break for them in terms of I mean, I haven't heard yet how serious it is, but any amount of time that he's out of there obviously leaves them with Nico Collins as their top receiver, who, is not bad, but is also not a guy who should really scare the hell out of anybody. At this point, you can cover him, you can provide help if needed, and after that, they've got a bunch of tight ends. They've got, what is it? Woods is their number 3 receiver. It's not anybody great anyway. And so they're a team I think they match up well. And to your point, I think that mobility is there, and they also they depend pretty heavily on the running game. The other thing I really love about the matchup with the Texans is the Texans have a very weak offensive line, lots of continuity issues, lots of talent issues, and they get right after that with the Ravens' strength, which is the defensive line. All right, let's move on to another question here. Appreciate that. Randy Morgan says, do you think this was overall a much better performance than the loss to Pittsburgh, or was this more of a game where we got all the luck in this game and Pittsburgh got most in the first one, plus their injuries?
Oh, I think this was definitely a better performance. I mean, we saw that overall. I think minus this was almost a 45-point Ravens performance. I mean, if Bateman doesn't misread that play, or Lamar's first read is Flowers instead of Bateman, that's another touchdown on the board for the Ravens. They just, it was a better called game. It was a better executed game. Obviously, Lamar's willingness to run in this game made a huge impact in a way that he was not willing to do in the first Pittsburgh game. And again, I think that's why I still think Lamar was nursing some kind of injury that the Ravens will never talk about and will never know about during that chunk of the season for the Ravens. Looks healthy, willing to run again. That changes everything for this team. His willingness to run opens up the read option game, which we have not seen for a while. It opens up the deep intermediate passing game. It opens up the deep game beyond that. Just all of those things happen, and we saw all those things happen in this game. Just overall, I think at almost every level in this game of performance, the Ravens defense, like by unit, kind of like defensive line, linebacker, secondary, we saw almost a better performance than we did in the Steelers' loss, which should have been a win. I still agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, they left a lot of points on the field the first time in various ways with the turnovers and the missed field goals. They really should have won that game. I would say you could pick a component. You could maybe say the defensive effort might have been better in that first game than it was in the second. I don't think you can say that about the offense at all. I think the offense clearly had a much better game. They ran the ball effectively, and they did all the things they needed to. I think you hit on some of that. But the difference in the balls bouncing was a not insignificant number of total points, but it's not as much as the Pittsburgh fans would have you believe either. Let's go to a third question. Rose Smith 95 says, do you think our drastic increase in read option recently is opponent based or a planned late season gear up we're making? Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave that for the offensive pod. So let me go back to that too. Here's one from Andrew Clark though that says, is that Ajabo's first game as a Raven, and have you seen anything from him to suggest he should get a larger role? Having a hard time with that question.
No, we haven't seen anything. No, we haven't. Definitely wasn't his first game, but we definitely have not seen anything that says Ajabo should have a larger role. I'm with you when you mentioned earlier that Isaac is at a point where we need to start to see if there's something there, and it's worthwhile to give him those snaps over David Ajabo.
How cool was it that your 4th round pick last year, who's not as highly thought of as Isaac is, Tavius Robinson, gets a bunch of playing time in his first year, and all of a sudden we know who he is in his second year, and we're leaning on him like nobody's business. So you really want to find out what you can from these players. The Ravens have had some real big successes in terms of rookies, even with low round draft capital coming up. The big one is Dwan Landry. He came in as a 5th round player. It was immediately a 5 interception strong safety stud in his first year for that 2006 defense. And a lot of people were just, they're throwing their arms up saying, what are the Ravens even thinking not having another safety? Will Demps was an undrafted free agent who immediately basically started at safety as well. They can do it. They just haven't always shown a willingness to do it. And I'm actually more bothered at certain other positions like safety, where they went after a player like Eddie Jackson rather than to really pull a guy who really had the characteristics, because even those older guys who have very low cap cost, like Jackson, a little bit of guaranteed money, but it's not much above the guaranteed minimum that they had to pay him. What they really waste for you is time. And Jackson just wasted a large portion of the season in very bad play for the Ravens, when they could have, had another fish and cut bait UDFA or rookie or cast off from some other team that would have been probably a better choice.
Or just let Darius Washington play.
Or just give you or put Brandon Stevens there regardless. Which at some point, a guy can play poorly enough at corner that you just have to say, look, we can give you a shot at safety, or it's the bench. Those are our options here. So, all right, let me see if we got one more question here. I think that actually might be it, but I will see if there's one more. There's one here, and this is we actually did this one last week. I did have a couple that came on Reddit, so I want to take a moment. If there's any other player you want to take a quick discussion of right now, we can do that before we hit these Reddit questions.
Yeah, my only, and this is not defensive related, but I don't think I've heard anything or seen anything about the Justice Hill injury, and I'm hopeful that, while not related to the defense, it's not something that we need to worry about. I will say, as a by and large comment about that, I've always said that Derrick Henry was more than capable of doing some of the things Justice Hill did in those situations, and he proved that in this game. He had a couple catches and a screen pass. Obviously, he's not going to run wheel routes in the same way Justice Hill does, but I think he could be an effective pass blocker because he's a massive human being. And I think that he's a guy that they can still use in passing situations. I was glad that they had to do that in this circumstance. So if the moment comes later, they don't feel like that he's incapable of doing that. It's the threat of him being there in those situations opens the door to more things, even if ultimately you still want to pass. I just hope Justice Hill's healthy.
Yeah, me too, of course. I mean, that was an awful looking thing to see him just lying there, people waving their hands like crazy, and not see exactly what was wrong. And then you see it. I was concerned it might be some sort of a lower leg injury initially, but then it became very clear from his lack of movement that it was not that, and he actually hit his head on the ground. You could see it, but very, very scary injury, and glad he got up. And hopefully there's no permanent damage there. It's as much as we pretend like a concussion is a non-permanent thing, you'll be by it. Hopefully this is, the one concussion he has in a career of moderate length. I got a double question here. It's pretty much the same question. So let's address them both at once. Bufudu says, and this is from Reddit, appreciate you with the question. What do you think of the current rotation of linebackers? I was surprised to see Chris Board get so many snaps while Simpson got none at linebacker, I believe. You're absolutely correct. Chris Board got a bunch of snaps and Simpson was benched for this game. And Daphne 3 says, to add to that, is the Board Harrison a pass run split with Board playing most of the passing downs? So we can address both those real quickly. I'll take the second part of it first. It is kind of a pass run split. They use Harrison in base packages at outside linebacker generally. So any outside linebacker package where Harrison is required, they stay with the committed nickel, and that means that Board has to play next to Roquan, even if it's on first down. But otherwise, Board snaps are primarily used on passing downs, and they would often have Harrison off the field on such a play because Harrison's not really valued as a pass rusher. So that's why this breakdown is occurring in this odd manner that you see, that Board is kind of forced into some early down snaps where you're wondering, why is he on the field? And he's generally on the field on later downs. Why do you think they can't get Simpson involved in this, Jordan?
They've just decided. I mean, there must be something that they see about what is happening from his processing perspective that they don't like. And I can appreciate the coaches know and see what has been told to do and what is happening in a way that is different than what we see. Obviously, as fans, we are much more outcome of the play driven. I think for teams, they are evaluating things on a much more complex level than that. And obviously the outcome matters, but the other things that are happening, even on successful plays for what Simpson might have been doing, are ones that could be dinging against him consistently. We don't know that, and we can't see that. And so my guess is it's somewhere in that mix of things. And then it could also just be like a get your head right kind of thing. But it's also I also give the Ravens some credit of like they've come to the point on the defense where they're like, if you're not showing up and you're not playing and you're not doing your job, you're not going to be on the field. And that's our mentality, and that's what we need from everybody. And we need the people that aren't doing that to sit down and be cool with it, because we weren't good enough in the first place. And so we've seen that with Marcus Williams. I think he's a talented guy. There's no reason to think that there's no reason to think that there's no place in the Ravens defense for Marcus Williams right now. But if the mentality is we need to be more committed to what we're doing as a team, so that is affected. I think that is part of what is affecting Trenton Simpson more than just his play on the field.
Okay, now I want to address that because my guess is it's two very different things. And the reason is the evolution of how he got to the spot. So in the case of Williams and Jackson, they gave both those guys chances. They gave them a week off to think about their problems. And in Williams' case, I believe he came back and he played after that. Jackson didn't and was cut and didn't travel with the team the next week, I believe, before he was cut. But it was he had a simply awful game when they relied on him as the free safety in Cleveland, and they lost that game, and they lost, frankly, the tiebreaker in the division currently that would have them winning this division right now, leading by a game with the tiebreaker with 2 weeks to play. And they that game was a very critical loss. He allowed effectively 3 touchdowns, two that were directly his responsibility. Another one where he failed to make the tackle on the play. So awful game for Jackson in that regard. Simpson doesn't have that sort of a record. So I don't think it's that. I think in Williams' case, it's more likely to be he was out of position a lot and not completely buying into the defense. There may have been some other flakiness, Chris McAllister questions, but if those really existed, I don't think he'd still be on the team. I think it's more likely that was what was hurting Jackson, was that he was also not willing to put in the time, practice right in order to get better at what he's doing. And also he probably just played too poorly to continue on. Deontay Johnson, completely attitude. That's why he's not on the team. I don't think that's the case with Trenton Simpson. I really think that the reason I don't think that is because the way his role was taken away a little bit at a time. So just the way you were talking earlier, Jordan, about how build on what the guy can do, they tried to take away from the more difficult responsibilities of Trenton Simpson first. And then they still couldn't find a way that it worked. And I think that's probably not a case of some attitude problem, although it's certainly possible, and I don't know, I'm not there, that some attitude problem developed because of it. But remember, we've heard all this stuff the rest of the year about how he wanted to be Roquan's shadow and always following all over the place. And I think that's the kind of attitude they frankly want in the guy who's going to play next to him. It's just my take on this. He hasn't missed any games. He's been active for every game, even though he hasn't played. I don't think it's the same as either the Williams or the Jackson situations.
I only mean it in the regard of by virtue of those situations happening, the hammer had to be dropped a little bit harder and a little bit faster. Okay. Also derivative of the performance of the defense. So okay. I think that if the offensive line and the offense was terrible, we might have seen changes on the interior of the guard position sooner. I think as fans, we look at that and we're frustrated by what we're seeing, but at the net end of the day, the result has been good enough that there's not as much pressure to drop the hammer. On the defense, it was completely the opposite of that. It is right. We're not getting it done. This is not Ravens defense. This is not what we do, and this is not what we expect. So if that is the baseline of kind of like where we are going and what we're operating off of, then all of a sudden it's a little bit different. And if someone like Marcus Williams is like, look, I'm willing to buy into this, but like, look what this fool's doing. He's not doing his job either. Then maybe you have to be a little bit quicker with the trigger to say, okay, you're right. And this is where we are for this year. And this is just how it's going to be. Trenton, don't take this. Like, this isn't about you. And this isn't about your growth and your progress or your opportunities in the future. This is about winning a Super Bowl this year. And this is going to be our mentality. And I think it was even Marlon Humphrey who came out and said, or maybe it was Kyle Hamilton. I think it was one of the two of them that Humphrey came out. And he said, if you're not doing your job, you don't have a spot on this field. And so if that was the mentality the team was going to take, I think it made it a little easier or a little quicker to get somebody to the bench. That is the only reason why I kind of like matched them up together. I do think that they're very different situations. But that being said, Trenton Simpson might be still active on game days because he can give you something on special teams where Marcus Williams is never going to do that for you. So he's going to be the first guy to be inactive. So I don't know. There are a lot of apples and oranges that are all mixed up in here that make it kind of hard to evaluate what one thing might mean versus another. But obviously Trenton Simpson has not progressed in 2 years in the way that we would have thought he would have.
And we do appreciate the question, but I think the comment from earlier in the show is a good one, that one possible option for the Ravens is to eliminate that position with the use of jumbo nickel, or going to, I mean, obviously it's the position is eliminated when they play dime. That's only 8 snaps. They didn't play a lot of dime in this game. And I don't think they're really going to be a big 4-corner dime team because it doesn't have the same flexibility with that weak side linebacker being a corner like Stevens. I just don't. I don't think it's.
And they're not going to be losing by 10 a lot. They're not going to be in one of those situations where, they're not going to be. Win. Oh, they are going to be winning by 10 a lot. So that that's when you are going to see more dime.
Yeah,
I kind of tied myself up there in that thought.
Okay, that happens. I'm at that age where it happens all the time, unfortunately. But that 2019 Ravens team played a huge percentage of dime. It was like 42% during the regular season. I think it might have been 40, maybe it had been 44% during the regular season. But the reason they were able to do it is they were, the constant leading games by 3 touchdowns. Martindale was happy to put in a race car package, in front of that, and just, it was a fun way to watch football that season. Is all I can say. Have a defense that loves to get after the quarterback with lots of back end strength that went with that. All right. Really appreciate the questions. Great set. And as always, keep them coming. Use hashtag Film Study Mailbag if you want to get something there. It can be just a comment. We might comment back on your comment, but it doesn't have to be just a question, but we do always appreciate the input and the new topics to bring out of the show. Jordan, thanks again for coming on. Tell folks where they can catch up with you online.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Raven Sit Room. Love to chat Ravens, especially as we're gearing up for this playoff run.
Tag in at Gabe Fergie as well, and those guys are 2 of the really brilliant minds that I depend on to talk football with on a very regular basis on this show. I'm sure you know that if you're regular listeners. I see it mentioned from time to time on various other platforms that these guys are on the show fairly regularly. So would love to see you guys have your own show back again. By the way, it was a very nice hour or so per week of discussion that was really well done. If you're a fan of the show, there's 3 things you can do at least to help us. Write us a short review on any of the podcast platforms. That'll help drive traffic. Like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Always tell a friend if you can about the platform. An older guy is always a target audience that I want to try and attract, because I think that they may have more stickiness to the platform. But please, if you can show them how to play the podcast directly off of either their phone or of a desktop or a laptop, that's a great way to do it as well. Really appreciate you, Jordan. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.